Start.
Okay.
Today we're going to replace the cylinders and rebuild the cylinders on the machine. First thing you want to do is get the machine in half stroke. So what you do to get the machine in half stroke is let it recharge completely. Turn your drive cylinder pressure down to 0. Open up both bleeder tubes. Slowly turn up your drive cylinder pressure until the piston is about half stroke, and then turn your drive cylinder pressure down to 0. Once it's in half stroke, now you can close your bleeders and shut the machine down. Once everything's depressurized, then we can start work on the machine. The first thing we'll do is take this hose off the dry end of the cylinder very easily. And then the next thing we're going to do is unbolt the coupling behind the faceplate. There's 3 Allen head bolts, so we'll take those apart. I want to cut for a second. Sorry. What I do is undo the 3 Allen head bolts to loosen the coupling. Once you get them loose, you can spin them right out. Once you have all the bolts taken out and the coupling's not attached anymore, now you can take the cylinder off. 3/4 inch socket. Loosen up all 4 bolts. Now we got to remove the hose from the back, the metering hose. Adjustable wrench on that fitting. Loosen it up. There's going to be some material that leaks out, so have a catch bucket underneath the hose for when you take the hose off. Release the hose and let that sit there and drip into a bucket. Once all 4 bolts are loose and taken out, the main coupling is undone, you can slide the cylinder right out. Now one thing you want to do on this is 1 cylinder at a time. Rebuild 1 cylinder. Only take 1 cylinder off at a time. Okay, cut.
Okay.
Now that we have this cylinder on the bench, now we can start taking it apart. First thing we're going to want to do is take this coupling off. 5/8 wrench. Whenever you put the wrench on here and you turn this, you always turn it clockwise depending on which end you're spinning from. You want to spin that way from that end, this way from this end. Okay, so we got to loosen the bolt. So we'll use the 5/8 wrench to lock, and then we'll come apart want to lock this end, 5/8 wrench on the flats, and then you can unlock this coupling and take this coupling off. Set that to the side. Now the next thing we want to do is loosen. The next thing we want to do is loosen our reservoir cups. We'll do that with our ball driver. Loosen them all the way. There will be oil when you take this off. Slide it all the way out. Leave to the side. Now you're going to do the same thing on the other end. You're going to undo your 4 bolts. Slide it off, get it out of the way. Next thing we're going to do is actually unbolt the cylinder. You need 2 3/4 inch box end wrenches, and you're just going to loosen all the tie rods. You can loosen them a little bit at a time. Okay, once you have all your tie rods loose, you can pull them out. Just remember you have a sleeve that goes over each tie rod. You can pull those out. Some models will also have not only these end spacer blocks here, but they'll also have an additional spacer block underneath. So make sure you put whatever spacer blocks come off, go back on the correct system. All this stuff, if it's got material on it, you can clean it, or if it's clean, you can just put it to the side. Now we're ready to crack our cylinder in half. This is the wet side, this is the dry side. This side is still going to have a lot of material in it. So when you pull this apart, you're going to have material coming out of here. So just keep that in mind. Do it on a piece of cardboard. Take that end block off. You take this end block off. You have 2 O-rings right here. Same thing on the other end. You'll be replacing those in the kit. Now to get this piston out of the cylinder, find yourself a wood edge, not on metal, but on wood, so you can tap the cylinder out. Now you can take a pick and very carefully pick these O-rings and remove the O-rings, put new O-rings on. Those are those O-rings. There are V-seals in the end block here. Again, you'll take your pick and very carefully, without scratching the end block, pick out those O-rings. Same thing in this end block. Same exact thing. So now you've got the whole cylinder apart. Now you can start putting it back together. First thing we're going to do is replace the V-seals. Okay. Once you have everything all cleaned up and you're ready to replace your seals, you're going to put your seal kit in first. You're going to put the smallest, thinnest one in first, male side up, and then follow it with each consecutive V-seal. Again, male side up, female side down. The last V-seal to go in is a fat one, female side down, flat side up. Once those are installed, you can take a little ISO oil, put it on your finger and get it on the ID. Make sure everything is nice and looped up. Clean everything off. Now you'll take your oil reservoir, put it back on, make sure your lube cup is lined up with the bleeder valve. And you can lightly torque these back down. Finger tight. No more than finger tight. You want it to be slightly loose when you put this back together. You're going to repeat the same step for this end block. After you get everything cleaned off and you replace your V-seals, you can put on your oil reservoir. Again, making sure your lube cup is lined up with the top of the cylinder, leaving it slightly loose. After you've cleaned everything up, now you can replace your O-rings on here. Take your cylinder, put some ISO oil inside there. Now you can take your cylinder, put it on the table, wood surface, hardwood surface, and you can tap it back on there. Make sure it's nice and loose. It goes back and forth. Now to put it back on the end blocks, put your seals back in. Put your seals in the end block. Again, making sure all material is cleaned. Nice clean surface. Same thing with this end block. Put your O-ring in the end block first, making sure everything's clean. Now you're ready to put your shaft through the end block. Making sure that this is a little loose, you can put your shaft straight through, wiggle it back and forth until it goes through. Keeping your label up top, making sure it seats into the end block correctly. Now you can take this end block, get it started, hold on to the shaft, wiggle it back and forth, and seat it on the end block. Okay. Now we put our standoffs back on. And we're ready to put our tie rods back on. Again, you have to go through the sleeve. Long tie rods on the bottom, short tie rods on the top. Flat washer first, then lock washer, then your nut. You want to do that on all four corners. Once the cylinder is all back together and you have everything hand tight, now you can go back with your wrenches and tighten them. Now you just want to do this pretty snug. We'll finish the final torque when we get it mounted back to the machine. But right now, we just want to make sure we get the cylinder stable so that when we lift it, it's not flopping and loose.
Okay.
Yep. Once you have your tie rods snug, now you can put your coupling back on. And again, you want to hold on to the shaft with a 5/8 wrench. And put your coupling in. You want it good and snug. Now your coupling's installed. Next step is to put it back on the machine. Now when you put this on the machine, because you've left these end reservoirs loose, obviously when you first put the back on this machine, it's not going to be quite lined up, but because it's loose, you can tap the shaft back and forth very easily to get it to line up correctly on the machine. When you go to put it back on the machine, you'll have to check to make sure your spacing is correct by making sure your holes line up here and your shafts fit in between the other two. If your shaft doesn't fit in between the other two and your holes are not lined up, then you take it back, put it on the bench, and tap your shafts either way until you get everything lined up and your holes line up here. Once you get the cylinder back in place, your shafts connect, your holes line up, then you can put your bolts back in. Loosely, finger tight, do not tighten down the cylinder at this point. Okay, cut. Once you have your bolts in and finger tight, now you're going to align the cylinder. First thing you want to do is get the coupling aligned. You need to align the bolt holes up to the other one. So what you're going to do to turn the shaft to line up the holes, put your 5/8 wrench on the flats, and again, turning clockwise only, rotate until the holes in the couplings line up. Then put your bolts back in. And when you tighten these bolts, make sure you're nice and flush with these two couplings. Now that your coupling's tight and they feel nice and flush with each other, now you want to make sure this end is lined up correctly. Once that's aligned, now you can snug down your cylinder a little bit more, but do not completely torque it down yet. Once you have those nice and snug, now you use your 3/4 inch wrenches and give these tie rods a nice torque. Once your tie rods are torqued, now you can come back to the base bolts and make sure those are torqued down. Nice and tight. All 4 corners. Once your cylinder, tie rods are tight, your standoffs are tight, now you can tighten up your oil reservoirs. 25 to 30 inch pounds. You want to tighten in such a manner, a little bit all the way around on each bolt until you achieve final torque. You want a nice even space all the way around the shaft. Once those are torqued, now you can fill your wet cup with your iso oil until it's full. There will be air trapped in there, so you might want to fill it and then recheck it until no more air comes out of there and it stays full. Last but not least, you put your air line back on. And that completes the rebuild for the cylinder.
Fluid hose.
Oh, yeah. Once your cylinder is all on, bolted down, your oil cups are tight and lubed, now you can put your hose back on. And tighten. When you're ready to replace the hardener cylinder, you're going to do the same steps to take it off the base plate as you would for this. Leave the machine in center stroke, undo your coupling, take your standoffs, bolts out, remove the cylinder, and rebuild it on the bench. On the hardener cylinder, once you have the cylinder apart, it's very much the same as the resin cylinder, but the insides are a little different. So you're going to take your cylinder apart, same as the other one, till you get to this point. You want to take a wood surface, tap your cylinder out. As you can see, the inside is different. You have one O-ring and one cup seal. The cup seal goes on the wet side, the O-ring goes on the dry side. When you take this apart and you want to replace these, the O-ring side you can take off with a pick, very carefully not to put gouges in the piston. The cup side, you will have to take the plate off. So that's 4 bolts with an Allen head. Obviously you'll have to clean this area really good with solvent to get all the material off, and then you can undo these 4 bolts. If they're tight and you cannot hold on to it and loosen them, you can put a 5/8 wrench in your vise and hold on to this end shaft. Hold this and use the 5/8 in the vise to hold this from turning while you get these bolts out. Once you have all these 4 bolts out, you can take your cover off and you can take your seal off. Replace it with a new one. Spring to the outside of the piston. Put your cover back on. These 4 bolts should have a little bit of Loctite on the threads. To get them tight, again, put your 5/8 wrench in a vise, set this in the 5/8 wrench, hold it up, and you can torque these. Good and snug with a little bit of Loctite. Once they're tight and you want to put it back in the cylinder, ISO oil, also ISO oil in the cylinder. Smear it all around, get it all nice and wet. Now this is very important how you put it back together. It must go back together this way. To put it back together this way is incorrect. This is correct. Once you have that, find a wood bench to tap it down on. And you can tap it into the cylinder. Once it's back in the cylinder, now you can put your end blocks back on, put your assembly back together. If you need to replace the piston, if the piston is too scored or you cannot use it anymore, you're going to take both end caps off by unscrewing all 4 of these bolts on both sides. Now that the bolts are out, you can take your end caps off and you can take your seals off. Note that one cover is smaller than the other. The smaller cover goes with the lip seal. The larger cover goes with the O-ring. Very important. When you're ready to replace this piston, you'll take this over to your vise and clamp these flats in your vise. Alright, cut. Okay, now you're going to put your flats in the vise. Then you're going to take your 5/8 wrench and untwist. Lefty-loosey, righty-tighty. You'll unscrew the shaft. Sometimes this stud will come out with this one, sometimes it will be left in this shaft. When you replace the piston, I suggest you replace this stud. The stud is Loctited in there, and that's all it is a connecting stud for these 2 shafts. Now that you got your piston exposed and you're ready to take it off, sometimes, because again we Loctite everything together, Loctite on these threads, Loctite on this shoulder, so that this assembly will not come apart in the cylinder. If this piston is stuck on that shaft, you can use a strap wrench to help break it free. Once you break it free, you should be able to use your hands, spin it, take it off the shaft. Take your new piston, a little bit of Loctite, put that back together. Put your new stud in with a little bit of Loctite. Screw it all the way in. A little Loctite on the shoulder. Screw the assembly back together. Take your 5/8 wrench. Nice and snug. Now you can ready to put your piston caps and seals back on. These are tools required to do a cylinder repair. Allen wrenches, a pick, a ratchet with a 3/4 inch deep socket with a couple of extensions, a couple of 5/8 wrenches, a couple of 3/4 inch wrenches, a couple of adjustable wrenches, a soft mallet, your ISO oil, and then these two tools will help. This is a 1/4 inch ball drive, and this is a soft strap wrench. This video is to repair the rotary. First thing you're going to do is make sure the machine is shut down, all depressurized. Next thing you're going to do is take your Allen wrench and loosen up. Oh shit, start over. This video is for repairing the rotary valve. First thing you're going to do is depressurize the machine, make sure it's all shut down. The next thing you'll do is take your hoses off. Get them loose, take all 3 hoses off. Once the hoses are off, now you can unbolt it from the side of the machine with the 4 outside bolts. Once those are loose, it will pull right off the side of the machine. Once you pull it off the side of the machine, you can take your coupling knuckle off. You can get rid of your 4 mount bolts. And then you can start taking apart your rotary. First thing you'll do is take your cap off. Should be an O-ring. I'll take this cap off this side. Take your cap off. This cap will have 2 O-rings. We'll have one in the center and then one on the outside. Those will come with the new kit. Okay. Now to get the plug out of the body, what you'll do is get a couple of blocks of wood. Okay. You'll center that on a couple of blocks of wood so it's stable. You'll take an 11/16 socket. And tap the assembly through. This is what's going to come out. Okay. You'll push down on that. There are 2 holes in this with O-rings. You can take your pick, get the O-rings out. All O-rings and the gold rule-on get thrown away. New O-rings and rule-on come with the kit. You will reuse your stem. Now you're going to put your smallest O-rings in those grooves. Then you'll correspond the holes in the plug with the holes in this and push it on. Careful not to extrude your O-rings when you push it in. Sometimes you have to roll it back and forth a few times to get it to seat correctly. And that's how it should look. Okay. Now prepare your body to put it back together. First thing you want to do is put your outside cover on. First thing you're going to want to do is put your O-ring on. Then your outside cover. Okay, cut. When you go to put your covers back on the body, you'll notice that these fittings are offset on the body. One side is closer than the other. The closest side goes towards the machine. Because of this, we've made it so that the covers only fit on one side. So when you go to replace your cover, if all 8 holes on each side do not line up with a hole underneath, you know you have the cover on the wrong side. Put your O-ring in first. Put the cover on that has the lettering on it. And put your bolts in. Once your cover is nice and tight, now you can flip it over. Put in your solid Teflon spacer with a little bit of iso oil. Stick it down in there. Now you're going to take your plug and put your plug in. Okay, cut. When you shut the machine down, you should shut it down in dispense mode. There are 2 lights on the faceplate of the machine. One indicates it's ready to go, green. One indicates recharge, which is red. You want to shut the machine down before this repair with a green light. Now, because of the green light, you're in dispense. So these 2 holes must line up with the dispense port on the top and the feed port on the back. Okay, so you're going to put that plug in there. We're going to take this over to the bench and insert it with the vise. When you're ready to put the plug in, 11/16 deep socket. Make sure your ports are lined up to the correct ports. Very carefully put it in the vise. Center it the best you can. And use the vise to seat your plug. Once you have your plug seated, now you're going to take your other Teflon spacer, a little bit of iso oil, put it right down on top. Then you'll take your cover with the hole in it, put your 2 O-rings in there. 014 goes in here. The 028 goes on here. Now you put the cover on with a twisting motion, and then line up your holes and put your assembly bolts back in. Once your rotary is all done, tight and put back together, and you're ready to put it on the machine, don't forget your knuckle. This will be 90 degrees out from the actuator. This knuckle makes up that 90 degrees. Do not forget to use the knuckle. Putting the rotary back on, you tighten up your hardware. Get those nice and tight. After that's tight, you can put your hoses back on. That's it.